Anastasia is grateful to have worked in the agriculture industry in Western Canada for the past 25 years. She has a Bachelor of Science in Agriculture and a Master of Science in Weed Ecology from the University of Manitoba. She has worked jobs in crop research, technical support, extension with Manitoba Agriculture, and is currently an agronomist and crop input manager for Paterson Grain. Finding solutions for farmers' crop production problems has always been her passion. In addition to her professional life, she farms with her husband, dad, and 3 sons in Holland, Manitoba. Please join me in welcoming Anastasia.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. I used to do a lot of these presentations. I don't very much anymore. I'm more focused on working with farmers in the field. So this is why I'm here today. I'm here to talk about some things that really frustrated some farmers that I worked with, as well as an agronomist, a lot of things that frustrated me as well. So some of the topics that I'm going to be covering today are early weeds that didn't die, in crop control that wasn't, slow desiccation and dry down and why that was some of the reasons towards that, why so much sclerotinia, specifically in soybeans, and finally, the bugs. So first of all, to start off with, a lot of the pictures that you're going to see in this presentation actually are from farmers' fields that I've been working with. If they're not, I have indicated where I borrowed them from. And then a lot of the things that I am talking about are things that the farmers that I work with have tried and have worked, have tried and have not have worked. And then some of the reasons why we did see a lot of these issues in 2025. It doesn't mean we're going to see them in 2026, but they're just something to keep in mind of future things that you could be looking at. So first of all, early weeds that wouldn't die. So this picture here is of American's dragon's head. This is one of the weeds that was quite prevalent in the area that I work in. I work, just to give you a context, kind of that Cypress River up to Austin, towards Treehorn, Rathwell, Holland, down to Crystal City. So I'm right in central southern Manitoba. We go from escarpment, heavy land, light land. We have a little bit of everything. So this weed here, when the snow melted, when farmers were coming into their field, when they were looking at were they going to direct seed, were they going to put on a pre-plant Roundup to try and control some of these weeds, what they were going to do to manage these weeds, I kept on getting more and more pictures of this specific weed and guys going, what the heck is this and why is it so big? So one of the reasons this weed in particular, and some of the other ones I'm going to talk about in the next slide, is we went from a fall in 2024 that was pretty decent, it was long, and then bang, we got snow. We had warm ground, we had snow cover, and we had some big weeds that were quite hardy and quite ready to hang out over the winter. Come spring, April was a bit longer, cooler, we had good snow melts, things were looking great, and these weeds just took off and were ready to go. By the time farmers got in the field, they were much bigger than what they're used to. So these are some of the other weeds that we saw in the field. So on the top corner here, white cockle, dandelion, Canada thistle, absinthe, and Canada fleabane. A lot of these were a lot larger than what we've seen in the past, and farmers were kind of scratching their head of, do I just use Roundup? What else could I be using to try and control these? One of these weeds in particular, so this is white cockle, this one has been becoming more and more of an issue, especially in some of the lighter transition land that we have. This one as well, in really uncompetitive crops, for example, something like peas. If you don't control it before you're going into the crop, you're going to have a real mess when it comes to pre-harvest and combine time. So all of these weeds being either perennials, winter annuals, biennials, really their best way to control them with Roundup is a fall applied Roundup. In lots of cases, guys maybe are still combining, the weather's not cooperating, they maybe didn't get in there with that fall applied Roundup. So now we're faced with what to do with them in the spring. So one thing that we did find last year and in previous years is using that Roundup spring burn down, adding something into that Roundup mix really went a long way, especially with some of these really large weeds. Because if you look into your guide to crop protection, it's saying you want to control weeds when they're smaller than 4 inches, not 4 feet across, not 4 feet high. Smaller is better. And with these ones, they just needed a little bit of help. So as well, this is just another slide where you can see in the background there's lots of little tiny weeds. This is another situation that farmers are coming into. they'd had good rainfall, they had warm soils, they had a lot of weeds that had popped up. And then now what were they going to do to kind of get rid of this mess that they had? So one of the kind of mainstays that I know the guys that I work with and a lot of other guys is they're using that 0.67 liters an acre of Roundup. It gets great for grassy controls that have come up. It's really good on small annual weeds, but it does have a few hiccups. It doesn't have kochia control, and larger weeds, like what I showed in the last slide, it wasn't really doing the job. So something that we did see work a bit better was adding in either a residual with that Roundup or a burn-off. And I just want to go into a bit of the difference because they're a little bit different products. You are intending to use them a little bit differently. They kind of get the same results. They just kind of go at it a bit of a different way. So first of all, with the burn-off, which a lot of guys are used to, is with your Roundup and this product, you are killing everything that's there. Hopefully, it's dead. But if something comes up out of the ground 2 days later, sorry, you haven't got that one. These products are great on grassy and broadleaves. Many can be applied spring and fall. There's lots of modes of action to combat with herbicide tolerance with what you have with something, for example, like kochia. Larger broadleaf weeds, it can help with that. But one of the hiccups is the mode of action can be same as in crop products. So I'm not going to talk about a lot of products here. I'll just give a couple of examples. So Husky Pre, great product. Kochia Pre-Seed. Unfortunately, it has the same active as Infinity. So if Infinity is kind of your go-to to get your kochia in your field, using Husky Pre-Seed, then you're limiting your options in your crop. One of the other options that can be used is the residual control. So what you're doing there, it's killing what's coming. It's not necessarily only killing what's there. But the hiccup with this one is you need to apply it before those actual weeds have emerged. So if you have kochia that's a big issue in your area, you want to apply this before your kochia is coming up. Your kochia that's already come up, it's not really going to give you the control that you want. But anything that's coming up and emerging through that treated soil layer, you are going to get that kill. Some other things with this one is it needs to be incorporated. So you're probably familiar with some of the older products like Avidex, Treflan, Rival. You needed to have that incorporation through mechanical means. With some of these newer products, you can actually put it with your Roundup, you spray it on your soil, you don't need to be incorporating it into the ground. But the incorporation that you're hoping for is rainfall. So with some of these products, and we have seen it, is you need that 1/4 inch to a 1/2 inch of rainfall to get it and have that nice distribution into that soil for that treated layer. If we are not getting that rainfall that we were thinking we were going to get in the beginning of May, you're not getting the weed control that you were hoping to see. One of the ways to get around that, instead of applying that product right before you're seeding, or 2 or 3 days before you're seeding, or right after you're seeding, you could be putting it on 5 days, a week, 10 days prior to what you're seeding that crop. You're going to get, hopefully, more chance for that rainfall to fall, have that treated layer, and then you're going to be controlling those weeds. So broadleaf and grass weeds are part of its mandate as well. You can apply it spring or fall. Some of these products have a bit more specific weed spectrum, and they're more for more specific crops. They're not something that you can just apply on anything. A lot of these modes of action with this residual control, they are unique. They're not necessarily overlapping with a lot of the spring in-crop products that you're using. So it is kind of a nice way to using different herbicide groups, hopefully combating potential herbicide tolerance or delaying it, but there are limited products. So this slide here is just an example of going in with one of those pre-seed residuals. The product I'm going to talk about here is Authority or sulfentrazone. It's been on the market for a lot of years. I farm myself. This has been a godsend in peas and flax because Holland is like the mecca of kochia. I used to joke that I paid for some of my university tuition with like picking kochia throughout high school for people. So this is one where you would apply it early. And the nice thing about, kochia, there's really nothing nice about it, but it starts emerging really early. So based on a study from University of Manitoba, they said 0% emergence of kochia was at 50 growing degree days. If you correlate that back to what some of the weather station data says for Manitoba agriculture, That's kind of showing up late April to the first week of May. So typically when guys will be looking at doing that pre-seed or pre-emerge application of product prior to planting. So that's kind of that first star right there. So at the second star here, this is our 75% emergence. So at 298 to 322 growing degree days, which is approximately June 5th to 10th. So that kind of lines up when we would be having our in-crop application. So this is just kind of for illustrative purposes, but if you use this product before your kochia is coming up, it kind of is going to work for your 2 to 3 weeks. Then you're going to go again with your in-crop. All of this kochia that has emerged in this area, you have controlled. So the kochia that you're working with is kind of this part of the curve of emergence. They're going to be smaller, there's going to be less of them. Chances are you're going to have a lot better control on those versus trying to deal with everything that has emerged from here all the way up to here. So in crop control, that wasn't. Why did we have weed breakthroughs? I know one of the frustrating things that I have as an agronomist is things are looking good, the weed control is looking good, the crop is starting to mature, and holy smokes, where the heck did all those wild oats come from? Or kochia, or lamb's quarters, or red root pigweed, or Canada thistle, which I thought it was really interesting that Leaf brought that up, is it's not just controlling weeds so that you get better yields. When you deliver it to the elevator, it's so you don't get as much stockage. And then when it's going into the international market, it's so that we can have that trade with some of these countries. So really one of the things that we found and what I've really been working with farmers with is we need to go back to the 4 R's when it comes to actually herbicide application. We need the right product for the right species, and if you think you have herbicide tolerance, you need to test so you know what you actually can spray. You need the right rate. Again, this is species. So an example I'm going to use here is Puma. It has 2 rates. It has a green foxtail rate and it has a wild oat rate. If you're using the green foxtail rate and you're expecting to control all of your wild oats, you're not. Right time. As I mentioned before, small weeds are way easier to kill than larger weeds. So if you can get in there when the weeds are small, that's going to work much better. And the last thing is right place. So are you actually hitting the target? And I'm going to go over some of those things that we've seen that has worked for getting that target better. So water volume. You need penetration. When you're going in with a pre-seed or pre-emerge product, a lot of guys are going with 5 gallons, which is usually adequate. You have more product within that water. You have really small weeds. You have bare ground. You probably don't need piles of water. When you're going into in-crop, you're going to have potentially more weeds. You're going to have a thicker crop. You need more water. You can't get away with 5 gallons. 10 gallons is usually the minimum on a lot of the labels that you see. You need to be going with that if higher if your density is much better. Warm weather. Herbicides work better when the weather's warm. If you are having a period of cool days, if you're having potential for frost, if it's not above 10 degrees Celsius, your product may not be controlling your weeds as well as you hoped, and you actually may be getting some crop damage if you're applying it when it's too cool. When it gets too hot, plants are shutting down, they're not actively growing. Again, you're not getting as good a weed control, so trying to keep it in within that range. Time of day. Warmer temperatures and sunlight help, especially with products like Liberty and Bazagran. They are photosynthesis products. Sunlight helps them kill the weeds that are there better. You need to be spraying when it is light out. And adjuvants and surfactants. These are maybe something newer that not a lot of guys had been looking at 10 years ago. We have more and more of the products coming into the market, and they do a heck of a good job. So hard water, add a water conditioner. You might as well not be tying up your Roundup molecules with all that hard water. A sticker or a spreader for coverage. When we get to times of the year where it's quite dry or the weeds get a waxy coating, you really need to make sure that your herbicide is sticking to that weed surface so it can get into that weed and kill that weed. Penetrants help as well as that, getting into those thick cuticles. So some of the issues that we've seen in the past, specifically with things like lamb's quarters and red root pigweed, is as they get bigger and the weather gets more like Manitoba, dry and hot, the cuticle of that plant gets quite thick. So getting that product in there better is going to help you a lot more. Also, drift control agents. This one, I have a farmer, he's my husband, he hates spraying. He definitely hates spraying when it's windy out. Drift control agents do make him more confident that he's actually hitting the target instead of going off where it's not supposed to be. So these do help. Please talk to your agronomist about them. So slow and dry desiccation. So this is a field of flax in Austin, a very variable landscape. We have areas that are dead ripe, we have areas that are grass green. Flax and a lot of other crops are quite interesting when you're trying to desiccate them. So things that reduce uptake, and in this year we saw canola that wasn't drying down as quickly, flax that when using a product like Reglo just wasn't seeming to work and they were waiting and waiting and waiting. So dry, dusty conditions and glyphosate, the Roundup gets tied up with those dust molecules just like it does with hard water, so you're maybe not getting as good a dry down. We had downy mildew on our canola, so it made kind of like a sticky residue on that canola stalk, so your product wasn't able to penetrate in and give you the control that you wanted. Also frost, and this one was quite interesting. We didn't really have heavy frosts, definitely saw some leaf curling, but the plants and the crops that were sprayed after those light frosts, they really didn't die the way that we thought to. And in areas that were maybe a little bit more affected by frost but still looked like they were alive, they were not dying. So that was something quite interesting. You do need those plants to be actively growing for things like Roundup and for things like Reglone to actually kill them, make that tissue start to die, and get that crop to dry down like you want it to. So things that improve uptake, again, water volume, like what we talked about with herbicides, you need to use 15 to 20 gallons per acre of water. And especially in crops where you don't have a lot of surface area to hit, like flax, you definitely need to use high water volume. Timing as well is super important. Things like Reglone are really sensitive to light activation. So if you can spray going into dusk, and then you have that Reglone spraying onto that plant, you're using good water volume, you're getting a little bit of that dew from the evening, you're getting excellent spread down the cuticle of the plant, and when the light hits the next day, you have what Reglone is supposed to do. It's your liquid frost, your plant is starting to desiccate. Also, surfactant. If it says that you need surfactant, you need all the surfactant. If it gives you a range of surfactant, and if you have conditions where your desiccant may be a bit challenged, you need to use a higher rate of that surfactant. Again, it's that sticking, it's that spreading, it's getting all over that plant. It's like sunscreen. If you want it to work well, you've got to put it on and make sure it's everywhere you need. So moving on to sclerotinia in soybeans and why we saw so much of it this year. We did have dry weather in June and early July as we were getting into flowering. Sclerotinia checklist on some fields wasn't super high, so like that wet pant test. So we had lots of guys thinking, sclerotinia is not too much of an issue. And in soybeans, we don't really see sclerotinia in soybeans. But once we got to harvest time, we were seeing a lot more of it. So what happened? So one of the things that got brought up was maybe it was the smoke. It was really smoky out. Maybe that caused it. And weather. These two definitely were working together. So in 2025, I got this graphic from CBC. We had 352 smoke hours in 2025. The highest we'd had before that was 289. Typically, we're kind of around here. So yes, it was really smoky. But smoke alone isn't going to cause sclerotinia. What is our weather patterns. Oops. Work? Oh, here. So we have this block here. So I use the information from the Manitoba Crop Report looking at when soybeans were starting to flower, so that R1, to kind of when they were done flowering and then getting into that pod set, which is R4. So in about these 6 weeks here, this is kind of the peak time. So this is from my area, Treeherne. And what was going on there? Well, it was a little bit cooler and it was a little bit wetter. That combined with a bit of a perfect temperature range. So Sclerotinia likes 10 Celsius to 25 Celsius. That's when it really thrives. Between July 2nd and August 12th, our average temperature was between 12.4 and 24.2, and we had the right moisture. We were getting consistent small rainfalls. And the big thing is we had high humidity. So I'm not showing this data, but from the Ag Canada site at Cypress, Manitoba, it said between July 2nd and August 12th, on average, we were only getting 8 hours a day that it was less than 75% humidity. It was wet out. So the soybeans loved it. They started growing rapidly. They started closing in those rows, but they had a lot of humidity in there as well. And they had some sclerotia in there that was germinating, and it was starting to grow, and the apothecia, and we get that whole disease cycle. So when it came to harvest, we didn't see like a whole field necessarily that had sclerotinia. We saw patches around trees in heavy areas of the field, typically where maybe wheat might lodge in other years. But in the big place where we saw it was in irrigated fields. So the folks that were irrigating on some of that drier, sandier land, they were seeing quite high yield loss. And where we were seeing these patches, we were probably getting yield loss of 10 to 15 bushels an acre or higher. So what can we do to protect soybeans from sclerotinia in the future? It's the same with any other crop that has issues with sclerotinia. Crop rotation. We need to have that break between soybeans and other susceptible crops. We need to stop planting soybeans on canola, which I did see a lot in my area, and it was a lot of those fields where we had it worse. Seeding practices, planting early and avoiding heavy seeding rates. Row spacing, using wider row spacing. So this is a good recommendation, but I still have a lot of farmers that are doing solid seeded soybeans. So at higher populations, much narrower row spacing, lots of years they're getting a better crop because they're able to capture that moisture. If we are getting the conditions like we saw this year, these are fields that we're going to have to watch for in the future and consider a fungicide application. Manitoba Pulse Growers, with their on-farm field trials, have actually shown trial data since 2014 and mostly positive responses to using a fungicide for sclerotinia in soybeans. So on to the last topic, because I think I'm running out of time, and the bugs. So I'm not sure of other agronomists in here, but I really am frustrated when I see bugs at harvest in crops. Like we've got it through, it looks great, it doesn't have disease, the weeds are controlled, it looks awesome, then all of a sudden we see things like this. Bertha armyworms, and then in this year we actually saw this new one, cabbage seed pod weevil. And unfortunately, my talk overlaps with John Gavlosky because he's talking all about weevils. So if you can run over there afterwards, you are going to get much more of a lesson I'm giving you. So this is just a picture of some of the damage, and these are things to definitely watch for in the future. So bertha armyworm damage, a lot of you have probably seen this past. You're seeing that chewing of those pods. You may see the bertha armyworms underneath the canopy, but this is definitely a new one. So this is the cabbage seed pod weevil, and all you're going to see pre-harvest is this exit hole. If you want to look for the actual insect and realize that you have an issue and you need to spray, you need to be looking for this at the bud stage into that early flowering stage. So this is a preemptive scouting that we're going to have to start doing. This is an issue that we really haven't seen in Manitoba, but in 2025 we were seeing a lot of damage. And in our area, I actually did see a few fields with this on the edges when we were going into stage for a pre-harvest application, and it was quite shocking. So bertha armyworm, this is the second year that we've had spraying occurring in Manitoba, specifically in my area. We did actually see some parasitism late in the year, which is always great. And some fields are below thresholds, so they weren't sprayed. So it was there, it maybe wasn't as bad as what we had hoped for or needed to have that spray application, but it's something we're definitely going to have to watch out in 2026. For cabbage seed pod weevil, as we're only seeing that damage at pre-harvest, we need to be watching for it earlier, and we need to be doing some proactive sweeping. So as you're in there looking for staging for fungicide application in your canola, you're also going to need to be doing some sweeping and looking for these weevils as well. So just some final tips and takeaways. Spring 2025 had some really big overwintering weeds. Adding some additional modes of actions work better in burn-offs versus Roundup alone and pre-emerge, something to consider. Residual pre-emerge can help with some weed headaches, for example with kochia, and also with water hemp. That same products are good on water hemp as well, if that's something that you're facing. Target your weeds when you're small. Get your herbicide to the target. Make sure that what you're spraying is actually doing its intended job. Desiccants work faster with high water volume, warm temperatures, and actively growing crops. Consider a fungicide in soybeans if your risk is higher. And start scouting for cabbage seed pod weevils and bertha armyworms. And I think I have a couple minutes for questions, yes. And if you're wondering what this is Venus mallow. This is one of those weeds you'll take in university and have to identify in the labs, but you're probably not going to see it. We do have a lovely population at Cypress to Glenbrook, though.
Are there any questions? I'll ask a question then. Going into 2026, say, the first few weeks after seeding, what's the number one thing you want people to be looking out for and thinking about?
Probably weed control. Whether or not you work your field before you seed, use Roundup or any other herbicide prior to seeding or after seeding, you are going to have flushes of weeds that are coming up. That's just their nature. As it was said, my master's was in weed ecology. I looked at all sorts of weeds that were emerging in the crop. As you're looking at that population, you do need to be watching how big they are, how many you're getting, and then talking definitely to your retailer, your agronomist, or if you're doing your own agronomy, figuring out what product's going to be best for you.
Any other questions? Okay, with that, please join me in thanking Anastasia for a very interesting talk.